For 19 years, he was everything a family could ask for. Loyal, brave, steadfast. Through the seasons of life, through birthdays and storms, Duke stood watch. He wasn't just a dog. He was a guardian, a companion, a silent witness to laughter, to tears, to time itself passing by. But time has a cruel way of testing loyalty. When his legs grew tired and his once vibrant fur turned gray, Duke didn't ask for anything. Not for pity, not for praise. Just a quiet place to rest near the ones he loved. But instead, they left him. Dropped, off at a shelter like worn-out furniture, too burdensome to keep. The Montana Haven Animal Shelter wasn't cruel. It was simply cold, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones, not from the temperature, but from the loneliness. Dogs barked, tails wagged, hope shimmered behind cages. But not in Duke's corner. He didn't bark. He didn't move. He had stopped expecting anything. He had been there for 6 months. 6 months of people passing him by, reaching for younger dogs, stronger dogs. No one stopped for the old German shepherd whose eyes had grown cloudy and whose heart had grown quiet. Until her Sarah Bennett wasn't looking for a dog. She wasn't looking for anything, really. She had once been full of light, laughing beside her husband Jake as they volunteered at this very shelter. But illness took Jake, and with him, Sarah's sense of purpose dissolved. She hadn't been back since. Not until that morning. Something, grief, fate, or maybe just silence too heavy to bear, pulled her through the shelter doors. Rows of dogs greeted her with hope in their eyes. But it was the dog who didn't move who stopped her. Her tracks. There in the far corner lay Duke, a shadow of the hero he once was. So still he barely seemed alive. And in that stillness something stirred in Sarah. Something unspoken passed between them. A mirror of sorrow, of loss, of being left behind. And without knowing why, without asking anyone's opinion, Sarah stepped closer. Who was he? Why had no one taken him, and more importantly, why did he feel familiar? She didn't know his name yet, didn't know his story. All she knew was this: there was something about him that felt unfinished. This is the story of a forgotten warrior, and the woman who refused to let his final chapter end in silence. It's a story about second chances, about the quiet strength of choosing love again, and about how sometimes saving someone else becomes the only way to save yourself. Stay with us, because what happens next might just break your heart, and then stitch it back together in the most unexpected way. The drive home was long, silent, and filled with doubts. Duke lay curled in the back seat, his body so frail that Sarah checked the rearview mirror every few seconds, half afraid he might disappear altogether. He didn't whimper, didn't glance around. He was still like a statue carved from memory and bone. Every bump in the road seemed to rattle through his aging frame, but he didn't react. Sarah tightened her grip on the steering wheel. What had she just done? She had walked into the shelter intending only to visit, to fill an empty morning. She wasn't ready for this. She had barely managed to care for herself in the 2 years since Jake passed, and now she had brought home a 19-year-old dog who might not even make it through the night. The wind howled through the trees as she pulled into her driveway. Montana winters had a way of sneaking in early. Sarah stepped out, the cold air biting at her skin, and opened the back door. Duke didn't move. "Duke," she whispered. Nothing. A sharp spike of panic rose in her chest. Was he? She reached in and touched his side, warm, breathing, just barely. With a deep, shaky breath, she slid her arms beneath him. His body was so light, too light, and terrifyingly still. He didn't resist being lifted, didn't flinch, didn't seem to notice at all. Sarah carried him into the house, each step slow and deliberate, as if she were carrying a memory instead of a living thing. The house was quiet, too quiet. She laid Duke gently onto a thick dog bed near the fireplace, the same spot where Jake used to stretch out after long hikes. The irony didn't escape her. Two ghosts now sharing the same space. "You're home," she said softly, brushing her fingers through his brittle fur. "I promise." He didn't respond. His breathing was shallow, his eyes half-lidded. Sarah stood slowly and walked into the kitchen. She didn't know what a dog this old could eat, if he would eat at all. But she tried. Warm broth, softened kibble. Something easy, something gentle. She placed the bowl in front of him and knelt down. "Come on, buddy, just a little." Duke blinked but didn't sniff the bowl. He didn't even seem to notice it was there. Sarah felt something tighten in her throat. "What did they do to you?" she whispered. She found a soft blanket and draped it over his back. This time he didn't flinch. Progress, or just exhaustion? The hours passed. Sarah sat nearby, watching the embers glow in the fireplace. Duke barely moved. She leaned back, letting the weight of the day settle into her shoulders. Her eyelids grew heavy. Just a few minutes of rest. She woke with a start. The fire was down to glowing ash. The room was dark. Duke was gone. Her heart jumped into her throat. "Duke," she called, her voice sharp. No answer. She pushed herself off the couch, her feet cold against the wooden floor. She scanned the room, empty. Her pulse thundered in her ears. Then she saw him, in the hallway, standing, rigid, staring. His eyes were locked on the wall, unmoving. Sarah followed his gaze, a photograph. Jake, smiling, holding a puppy in his arms. One of their favorites. It had been taken years ago, long before hospitals and chemo and silence. Duke stood like a statue, his cloudy eyes fixed on Jake's face. Then, he whimpered, a low, broken sound. Not pain, not fear. Recognition. Sarah froze. He hadn't made a sound since she met him. But now, staring at a man he had never met, something inside him stirred. She took a slow step forward. "Duke?" He didn't turn to her, didn't move, but his breath was uneven, like he was remembering something too big for words. Sarah knelt beside him, resting her hand gently on his back. He didn't flinch this time. Still, he didn't relax either. "Come on, Duke," she whispered. "Let's get you back to bed." After a moment, he blinked, slowly, and then, as if shaking off a dream, he turned away from the photo. Back to the fireplace, back to the present. She walked beside him, not guiding, not pulling, just being there. He collapsed onto the bed with a soft grunt. She sat next to him, heart pounding. What had just happened? Had he known someone like Jake before? A voice, a scent, a memory, or was it something deeper, something Sarah couldn't name? The next morning, the fire crackled gently as Sarah stirred awake. She rubbed her eyes, still groggy. Then she saw him, Duke, awake, watching her, not just blinking, watching. Sarah's breath caught. "Morning, buddy," she whispered. He blinked. Again. She stood moving toward the kitchen, didn't call him, didn't coax. Behind her, a soft sound, pause on wood. She turned. Duke had followed her, not far, not fast, but it was something. Sarah knelt down, filling a bowl. "I know you don't trust me yet," she said, her voice barely above a breath. "But we're getting there, aren't we?" She placed the bowl down. He stared at it. Seconds passed. Then slowly, he lowered his head and took a bite. Sarah let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. Relief, joy, hope. It wasn't just a meal, it was a beginning. Sarah couldn't stop thinking about the way Duke had stared at Jake's photo. The emotion in his eyes, the soft, broken whimper. It wasn't random. Something had stirred in him, something buried and long dormant. In the days that followed, Duke began to shift, not in grand ways. He didn't play or wag his tail like a puppy, but in quiet, unmistakable moments. He ate now. Not much, but enough. He would follow Sarah from room to room, never too close, never touching, but always watching. Like a shadow. One evening, she sat on the living room floor with a photo album in her lap. Duke lay nearby, his chin on his paws, his gaze distant. She turned the pages slowly, stopping at a picture of Jake holding a puppy, both faces full of life. "You would have liked him," she whispered, tracing Jake's face with her fingertip. He was calm, quiet, brave. Duke lifted his head. Sarah blinked. "You remember someone like him, don't you?" she murmured, her heart skipping. She set the photo down and looked at Duke. He looked back. Who had he been before this? Before the shelter, before the silence? She needed answers. The next morning, Sarah pulled out the adoption papers. Greg had mentioned the previous owners. Their names, their address, it was all there. Sarah hesitated. She wasn't seeking confrontation. She just needed to understand. She drove across town to a neighborhood far removed from hardship. Large houses, manicured lawns, everything neat, tidy, untouched. It didn't fit the story of a family forced to give up a pet. No, this was something else. She rang the doorbell. A woman in her early 60s opened the door. Expensive sweater, pearl earrings, the kind of face that had never faced desperation. "Can I help you?" the woman asked, mildly annoyed. Sarah took breath. "My name is Sarah Bennett. I adopted Duke." The woman's face stayed blank. "The dog," Sarah clarified. "The one you left at the shelter." A flicker of recognition, then a shrug. "Oh, him, not Duke, not our dog. Just him." Sarah felt her hands tighten into fists. "I was hoping you could tell me more about his past," she said, keeping her voice calm. "I want to understand where he came from." The woman pursed her lips. "We had him for a long time. He was getting old, slowing down. It wasn't fair to keep him." Sarah's stomach twisted. "So you abandoned him?" "We gave him a chance." The woman replied coolly. "At a better life." "He's 19, Sarah snapped. "You knew no one was going to adopt him." The woman didn't flinch. "Why are you here?" Sarah exhaled. "Because there's something about Duke I don't understand, and I think it has to do with his past." A pause, a flicker in the woman's eyes. She looked away. "You should speak to my husband." Sarah stepped inside. The man was already seated in the living room, gray-haired, early 60s, his posture stiff, his eyes tired. Regret lingered on his face like a shadow. "So," he said quietly, "you have him now." Sarah nodded. "Yes," the man sighed. "He wasn't supposed to be ours." Sarah frowned. "What do you mean?" "We didn't adopt him as a pet," he explained. "He was a partner." Her heart stopped. "A partner?" "I was a police officer. Retired now. Duke. He wasn't always Duke. His name was Shadow. He was my K9. Sarah stared, stunned. A K9, a trained service dog, a warrior. The pieces clicked into place. The way he scanned the room, the quiet obedience, the haunted eyes, the way he had reacted to Jake's photo. Jake, who had once worn a uniform, who had carried the same quiet steadiness. He was the best, the man said, voice low. "The kind of dog you don't forget." Sarah blinked back a wave of emotion. "Why didn't you tell the shelter?" "It wouldn't have mattered. He was old, sick. No one would want him." "He wasn't just a dog," Sarah whispered. "He would have died for you." The man looked away. "I know." "So why did you leave him?" she asked, voice trembling. The man hesitated, his fists clenched. "Because I couldn't watch him die." Silence. He wasn't himself anymore. He added. "He forgot commands, his legs gave out. It broke me. I couldn't bear it." Sarah's voice cracked. "That's not a reason." He flinched. "He gave you everything," she said, eyes stinging. "And when he needed you most." The man's face twisted with guilt. "You're right," he whispered. "I failed him." She turned to leave. "Wait," he called. "Is he still fighting?" Sarah looked back, and in a voice filled with steady, quiet certainty, she said, "Yes." As she walked to her car, a new thought hit her. Something she hadn't considered until now. If Duke had been a K-9, that meant he had been trained, experienced, trusted with missions. What else had he seen? What had he carried all these years? Was there more to his story, something even his former partner didn't know? The road home blurred under her tires. The anger pulsed beneath her skin, but stronger than that was a burning need for truth. Duke hadn't just been discarded, he had been erased. She wouldn't let that be his legacy. When she opened the front door, Duke lifted his head. His eyes met hers. Something flickered there, not just awareness, something deeper. She knelt beside him. "I know who you are now," she whispered. His ears twitched. "You weren't just a good boy," she continued. "You were the best." Duke blinked, slow, deliberate. Sarah felt tears rise. "They didn't deserve you," she said, and for the first time Duke leaned into her touch. Just a little, but it was everything. Duke had been fighting all his life. He had fought beside humans in uniform, through danger and duty. He had fought through years of aging bones, a weakening body, and the crushing silence of abandonment. And now, as Sarah watched him sleep by the fireplace, she saw it again, that quiet, stubborn strength still buried somewhere inside him. But time was no longer on his side. She awoke one morning to a sound that didn't belong, a low, broken whimper. Not the soft murmur he made when dreaming, but a sound thick with pain. Her eyes snapped open. "Duke?" She sat up. The bed was empty. Panic gripped her. She found him curled tightly in his blanket, his body shaking uncontrollably. His breathing was fast, too fast, shallow. "Wrong. No, no, no," she breathed, racing to his side. His eyes were glassy. His limbs twitched, spasming. His tongue lolled slightly from his mouth. She didn't think. She just moved, phone in one hand, Duke in the other. "Please pick up," she whispered. "Please." "Dr. Whitaker's office," came the voice. "He's not breathing right," Sarah cut in. "He's shaking, he's not responding. Bring him in. Now." She didn't even hang up. She just ran. The drive was a blur, her knuckles white. On the wheel, tears clouding her vision. Duke lay in the passenger seat, his head resting against her arm, barely conscious. Just hours ago he had followed her into the kitchen. And now this. Not like this, she thought, not now. The vet clinic was cold and sterile, a blur of white coats and beeping machines. Sarah sat alone in the waiting room, her heart pounding, her stomach churning. She didn't notice the other patients, didn't feel the minutes ticking by. Then, the door opened. Dr. Whitaker stepped in. His face gave away nothing. Sarah stood, barely breathing. "How is he?" "He's stable," the vet said. Her knees nearly gave out. "But," he added, his voice softening, "his body is shutting down. His organs are starting to fail. Sarah, he's 19. It's a miracle he's made it this far." Sarah nodded slowly. She had known. She just hadn't wanted to believe. Dr. Whitaker hesitated. "I have to ask, do you want to let him go?" The question hung in the air like smoke, thick, suffocating. "Let him go?" She looked through the window into the treatment room. Duke lay on a table, an IV in his leg, breathing, still fighting. Could she really choose to end it? Could she really let him go? She remembered his eyes, the way he had looked at Jake's photo, the slow lean into her hand, the first bite of food. After days of nothing, he wasn't done, not yet. Her voice shook. "Is there another option?" Dr. Whitaker nodded. "Intensive care. It won't be easy. You'd have to hand feed him, give medication, physical therapy, around-the-clock support. And no guarantees." Sarah looked at Duke again. She saw more than a sick dog. She saw a soldier, a survivor, and for the first time in a long time, she knew exactly what she had to do. "We fight," she said. The next 2 weeks were a test of everything she had left. Sleep became a luxury. Every few hours, Sarah coaxed Duke to eat, sometimes one spoonful at a time. She carried him outside to feel the sun, then back inside when his legs gave out. She massaged his muscles, whispered encouragement, stayed up watching his chest rise and fall. Most days there was no progress, just survival. But then, a flicker. He took 3 bites instead of 1. He held her gaze just a little longer. And one cold evening, as she sat beside him rubbing his back, something shifted. Duke lifted his head and pressed his nose gently into her hand. Sarah froze. Then came the softest brush of a tongue. He had licked her. It was small, so small, but it was everything. From there, the days became easier, if only by inches. He still needed help, still tired easily. But he followed her more now, not just out of habit, but purpose. He rested near her, watched her, sometimes even, lifted his ears when she spoke. And then, one morning, he stood up, all on his own. Sarah had just stepped outside when she turned and saw him in the doorway, standing. His legs wobbled. His frame shook, but he was standing. Tears filled her eyes. Duke, his ears flicked. Then slowly he stepped forward, one step, then another. Sarah clapped a hand to her mouth, choking back a sob. "You did it," she whispered. He took a few. More steps, then lay down again, panting hard. But his eyes were clear, bright, alive. The days turned into weeks. Duke ate more, slept better, followed her from room to room with steadier steps. Sometimes he even stood by the window, gazing out at the trees like he remembered what it was to watch over something again. Sarah didn't expect a miracle. She knew Duke would never be young again, knew every extra day was a gift, not a promise. But he was here. He was trying. And in trying, he was teaching her something she hadn't felt since Jake died. Hope. They sat on the porch one afternoon, watching the wind move through the tall grass. "You should have been gone," Sarah whispered. "But you're still here." Duke glanced at her, his cloudy eyes softer now. Present. She reached over and ran her fingers through his fur. "You're not Shadow anymore," she said. "You're Duke. And you're home." Duke sighed and rested his head on her lap. For the first time, Sarah didn't feel like she was waiting for the end. She felt like she was living again, and so was he. There was a rhythm now. Each morning, Duke would rise slowly from his bed, stretch his stiff legs, and wait for Sarah by the kitchen doorway. She always greeted him the same way. "Morning, soldier." And he would blink, then follow her in silence, the soft pads of his feet gently tapping against the hardwood floor. It wasn't just routine. It was trust. It was the fragile rebuilding of a bond that neither of them had expected to need again. Sarah noticed the little things, how Duke now laid with his back turned to the door, not out of carelessness, but comfort. How he would rest, his chin on her foot when she sat reading. How sometimes, when the firelight flickered just right, he would almost smile. He was still old, still slow, but his presence had changed. He was no longer waiting to die. He was beginning to live. Sarah kept wondering what had brought him back. Was it the warmth of the fireplace, the slow meals, the sound of her voice? Or was it something deeper, something that had shifted in the moment he realized he hadn't been forgotten after all? One afternoon, she brought out a box of photos, not of Jake, but of Duke's early days at the shelter. The contrast was staggering. Then, hollow eyes, slumped spine, a soul folded inward. Now, alert gaze, even if cloudy, a slight wag of the tail when she entered the room. She flipped through a few more pages and paused at one of Jake in uniform, standing next to a K9 that looked eerily familiar. Her fingers trembled. It wasn't Duke, but it might as well have been. She thought of Duke's old name, Shadow, the way he had responded to command tones without needing words, the way his body still remembered discipline, even if his bones didn't, and the way he had locked eyes with Jake's photo, like he saw more than an image. Maybe he had loved someone like Jake once. Maybe he had lost him too. As the days grew, shorter and the nights colder, Sarah started wrapping a thick scarf around Duke's neck when they went outside. He never minded. Sometimes he'd pause, ears flicking toward the wind, like listening for distant voices only he could hear. One early morning, Sarah watched Duke walk a full lap around the backyard. Slow, determined, with a kind of dignity only time could teach. When he came back to her, his breaths were heavy, but his eyes were bright. "You're a miracle, you know that?" she whispered, burying her face into his fur. He leaned into her. The bond between them had become something unspoken, not just love, but survival. They had rescued each other in different ways. Duke from abandonment, Sarah from grief. They began visiting the shelter again, just to walk the others. Sarah hadn't expected the reaction when they arrived. Emma, the young volunteer, burst into tears the moment she saw him. "I didn't think I'd ever see him stand again," she whispered, kneeling to hug Duke gently. Greg watched in stunned silence. "How did you—" Sarah smiled. "I just didn't let go." Word of Duke's story began to spread. People came by just to see him. A few even asked if they could adopt an older dog too. Not everyone wanted a puppy anymore. Duke had become something more than a dog. He had become a symbol. Sarah started writing about their journey. Nothing grand, just journal entries at first. Then a blog. Then requests for interviews. A local paper ran a feature titled, "The Dog Who Came Back." From nothing. But Sarah didn't care about the attention. She cared about mornings with warm broth and slow tail wags. She cared about evening walks where Duke would stop to sniff the same tree every time. She cared about the way he would curl up by the fire, head resting on her foot, as if anchoring her to the world. One night, while she was brushing Duke's coat, she found an old scar on his side. Faint, almost invisible beneath the fading fur. "What did you survive?" she asked softly. Duke looked at her. She didn't expect an answer, but she saw something in his gaze, a quiet pride. Not for the pain, but for the endurance. He had made it through something, through everything, and he was still here. And that was enough. Winter deepened. The days grew darker, the wind sharper. Sarah took Duke's health more seriously than ever. Vet checkups, supplements, heated pads, anything to keep him comfortable. There were still hard days, days when his legs didn't work, when his eyes seemed more cloud than sight, days when he needed help to eat, to rise, to rest. But even on those days he didn't give up, neither did she. And then came the night when Sarah sat beside the fire, the house quiet, and Duke stirred in his sleep. He made a small sound, a whimper, but not of pain. It was soft, dreamlike. She leaned in. "Are you running again?" she whispered. In the dream world, maybe he was. Maybe he was chasing something, someone, a memory, a mission, a life before the cage, before the silence. She reached down and stroked his fur. "I'm still here," she said. "We're still fighting." Duke shifted and let out a long breath as if exhaling decades of sorrow. And for the first time since she brought him home, his tail wagged while he slept. Sarah watched, tears stinging her eyes. This was what healing looked like. Not perfect, not easy, but real. And for the first time, she wasn't afraid of what came next. Whatever days remained for Duke would be days filled with purpose. With firelight and whispered words, with shared silence, with home, because no matter how broken a life seemed, no matter how forgotten, it could still be mended with love. And as long as Duke was still breathing, she would keep choosing him, again and again, every day. In the end, Duke didn't need a miracle. He became one. From a forgotten corner in a shelter to a warm home filled with light and second chances, he found something he never expected in his final chapter: belonging. And Sarah? She didn't just rescue a dog. She rediscovered herself. Together they built something fragile but unbreakable, a life where every quiet moment mattered, where every breath, Every step, every slow wag of a tail was a victory against all odds. Duke never ran again like he used to. His bones were too old, his legs too tired. But he walked, proud, steady, side by side with the woman who refused to let him go. In their silence there was understanding. In their routines there was healing. And in their shared brokenness there was something beautiful. Wholeness. One snowy evening, Sarah stood by the window, watching snowflakes fall gently against the glass. Duke was curled at her feet, his breathing slow, peaceful. She knelt beside him, resting her forehead gently against his. "You were never just a dog," she whispered. "You were someone's hero. And now, you're mine." His tail flicked. Once just enough. And that was all she needed, because she knew now love doesn't have an expiration date. Worth isn't measured by youth or strength or years left to live. Sometimes the most extraordinary kind of love happens when everything else has fallen away. When all that's left is the decision to stay, to fight, to care. Duke's story wasn't just about survival, it was about redemption. And while no one could change the years he lost, Sarah had given him something far more powerful than time. She had given him a place to belong, a home, a final chapter, written not in sorrow but in grace. If this story has touched you, if you've ever looked into the eyes of someone forgotten and seen something still shining there, know this: it's never too late to choose love, to choose rescue, to choose one more try. There are more Dukes out there, waiting, watching, hoping. And maybe, just maybe, someone like you will be the one who steps forward and says, "You're not done yet. I see you. I choose you." Because the world doesn't need more perfection. It needs more compassion, more quiet miracles, more people willing to say, "Not now, not like this." Duke may be resting now, but his story isn't over. It lives on in every old dog given a second chance, in every person who chooses to love when it's hardest, and in the next chapter which is already being written. So stay with us, because Duke's journey has just begun, and what comes next